baby didn't die. I sold it for money.
Samuel Blake froze by the half-open door, his knuckles whitening around the house keys. He wasn't supposed to be home this early. The traffic jam that had cleared quicker than expected was the only reason he was standing here now, hearing words that didn't belong to him. His wife's voice floated across the living room, soft but deadly, each syllable slicing through the air. "The baby didn't die," Clara whispered. "I sold it for money." The man across from her chuckled, low and greedy. Ryan Carter's voice was unmistakable, smug and self-assured. "That's my Clara. Always thinking ahead." Samuel's too naive to suspect anything. Samuel's chest rose and fell like a furnace. His entire world, carefully built on devotion, sacrifice, and trust, fractured silently in that moment. But he didn't storm in. He didn't shout. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows of the hallway, every muscle trembling with a rage so sharp it could cut steel. His silence became his first act of revenge. From the outside, Samuel had everything. A sprawling suburban home with manicured lawns, 2 imported cars gleaming in the driveway, and a career as regional logistics manager pulling in 6 figures a year. Neighbors called him disciplined, respectful, the kind of man who never missed Sunday service. But what they didn't see was the boy he used to be, the orphan who grew up bouncing from one foster home to another, clutching the idea of family like it was oxygen. That was why this betrayal didn't just hurt, it hollowed him out. "Ryan," Clara murmured, twirling her diamond bracelet, "I can't live small anymore. Samuel keeps saving, planning, waiting for tomorrow. I want life now." The money from the baby, it was just the start. Samuel pressed his forehead to the wall, the memory flooding back, her cold expression the night she told him the baby was stillborn, how she'd avoided his eyes when he cried against her shoulder. He'd thought grief hardened her. Now he knew greed had. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Reflex made him grab it, silencing it before the sound could betray him. But that moment sparked an idea. He opened the recording app and slid the phone forward through the crack of the door, capturing Clara's confession. Insurance. Ammunition. Ryan leaned closer to Clara, his words like oil. "One day, Samuel's fortune will be ours too. He doesn't know how to fight men like me. He trusts you too much." Samuel's lips curved into the faintest smile, dark and controlled. He thought of the accounts he'd quietly opened in his name, the forensic accountant he'd consulted months ago when Clara had first started withdrawing money in cash. He hadn't wanted to believe she was plotting against him. But now every unanswered question had an answer. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, whispering only to himself, "You'll confess again, Clara. But next time, it'll be on my terms." And with that, Samuel stepped silently into the night air, the camera lingering on his clenched jaw as the light from the street lamps carved shadows across his face, shadows of a man no longer a victim, but a hunter. The next morning, Samuel sat at the polished oak dining table, sipping his coffee as if nothing had happened. Across from him, Clara moved gracefully, her silk robe swaying as she poured orange juice. She smiled too easily, the kind of smile that once made him fall in love but now only reminded him of the venom he'd heard the night before. "Long night at the office?" she asked, sliding a plate of eggs toward him. "Yeah," Samuel murmured, forcing calm into his tone. "Numbers were a mess. Had to stay late." She nodded, her eyes lingering a moment too long on her phone before she tucked it under the table. He noticed. He always noticed. Ryan's name never flashed openly anymore, just initials, coded messages. Foreshadowing that Clara had perfected lies the way some people perfected cooking. As she hummed softly and buttered her toast, Samuel's mind drifted back to when they'd first met. Clara had been radiant in a crowded fundraiser, dressed in a gown that wasn't hers but borrowed from a wealthy cousin. She had leaned into him that night and whispered, "I hate being ordinary." He'd laughed then, thinking it was charm. Now he realized it had been a confession. Clara snapped him back to the present. Sam, don't forget, we've got dinner with the Reynolds this weekend. They're important for Ryan's new project. His jaw clenched. Ryan's project? She froze for a heartbeat, then smiled again. Oh, I mean for us. For the neighborhood. You know how he always includes us. Samuel nodded slowly, hiding the storm behind his eyes. He reached for his phone under the table, pretending to scroll through emails, but instead replaying the recording from last night with the volume low. Clara's voice echoed in his head, chilling him all over again. The baby didn't die. I sold it for money. Sam. Clara's tone sharpened, her suspicion flickering. He looked up smoothly. Just work. Don't worry. That night, when Clara drifted to sleep beside him in their king-sized bed, Samuel lay awake staring at the ceiling. Memories of the hospital years ago flashed, how she had barely shed a tear when the doctor announced the stillbirth, how quickly she had signed papers, how she had insisted on cremation without a service. Back then, grief had silenced his questions. Now those memories formed a perfect puzzle, each piece spelling betrayal. He turned to her sleeping form, her face serene in the pale moonlight. You thought you buried the truth, he thought bitterly. But I'll dig it up. And I'll bury you with it instead. The next day, Samuel visited the bank during lunch. In the manager's office, he quietly shifted large sums from their joint savings into an account only he could access. The manager raised an eyebrow, but Samuel's calm voice smoothed it over. Just diversifying, planning ahead. When he returned home, Clara greeted him with a kiss that tasted like ash. He kissed her back, eyes open, watching her, already envisioning the moment when her carefully built lies would collapse around her like glass. And then, just as she turned away to pour herself wine, his phone buzzed again. A text from an unlisted number appeared. 3 words that made his pulse stop. I know everything. Samuel stared at the message on his phone, the glow burning into his eyes. I know everything. His first thought was that Clara had discovered his recording. His second was darker, someone else knew the secret, and that meant the truth about his child wasn't as buried as Clara believed. He typed back quickly, hands steady though his chest thundered. Who are you? No reply came, only silence, as if the sender wanted him to stew in his own dread. At dinner that night, Clara's laughter filled the room. She poured red wine into crystal glasses, her manicured fingers glittering under the chandelier. Sam, you're too serious these days, she teased, brushing his arm. Ryan says I should get you to loosen up. The name stung, though her lips curved like honey. Samuel forced a chuckle. Ryan always has advice. Doesn't he? She smirked. He's successful. He understands life. Not everything has to be about saving and planning for the future. Her words echoed a memory. Years ago, in the small apartment where they began their marriage, Clara had once cried against his chest when he missed rent to pay for her mother's medical bills. I don't need mansions, she'd said back then. I just need you. He had believed her. Now, staring at her gold necklace, he realized that had been a younger Clara, a version long dead. His phone buzzed again under the table. Another message. Your child is alive. Do you want proof? His fork froze halfway to his mouth. Across from him, Clara leaned back, sipping wine, unaware of the storm in his head. Later, when she fell asleep, Samuel left the house quietly. He drove to the address the message contained, an orphanage tucked away on the edge of the city. The iron gates creaked open, and a woman with weary eyes met him at the entrance. You're Samuel Blake, she whispered. Yes, he said, voice low. She nodded and led him through dimly lit halls, children's drawings taped to peeling walls. At the end, she opened a door. Inside, a boy no older than 7 sat cross-legged on the bed, holding a toy truck. Samuel's breath caught. The boy's jawline, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, it was like looking into a mirror from decades ago. The woman's voice was soft. He came here as an infant. No records of parents, but I've always felt something was off. When I heard about you. Samuel's throat tightened. He crouched slowly, whispering, "Hey, buddy." The boy looked up, curious, his dark eyes wide but calm. "Who are you?" Samuel swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "Someone who should have never let you go." 1,000 questions roared inside him, but one certainty drowned them all: Clara's betrayal wasn't just marital. She had stolen his blood, his legacy. And for that, her punishment would be brutal. As he left the orphanage, Samuel looked up at the night sky, a bitter vow forming on his lips. "She'll confess again," he muttered, "but this time it won't just cost her dignity. It'll cost her everything she worships." Samuel's hand tightened on the steering wheel as he drove back from the orphanage. The boy's face burned into his mind. Every small detail haunted him, the way the child tilted his head in curiosity, the same way Samuel had done as a boy, the subtle dimple in his left cheek, a trait his mother used to tease him about. Clara had told him their baby was ashes in an urn. Instead, she had sold his bloodline to strangers. When he arrived home, Clara was in the living room, lounging in silk pajamas, scrolling her phone. She glanced up, her smile automatic. "You're late. Don't tell me work again." Samuel forced a tired sigh, loosening his tie. "You know how it is. Deadlines don't wait." She chuckled. "Ryan says a man should make money work for him, not the other way around." Her slip was deliberate this time, Samuel noted. She wanted him to react, to prove her control. Instead, he crossed the room and kissed her forehead. "Ryan has a lot of opinions." His calmness unsettled her, he saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. He excused himself to the study, where the smell of leather and old books steadied him. He remembered his foster father, a stern man who once told him, "A real man doesn't shout when he's wronged. He waits, sharpens his blade in silence, then strikes so they never stand again." At the time, Samuel hadn't understood. Tonight, he did. The following evening, Clara and Ryan met in Ryan's condo, not knowing Samuel had planted a discreet camera weeks earlier, hidden in a vase he'd given Clara for their last anniversary. On his laptop, Samuel watched them sip wine, their voices low. "We're close," Ryan said, his arm draped casually across the sofa. "Once Samuel invests in my real estate deal, we'll cash out, and then he's useless to us." Clara leaned against him, her laugh sharp. "He trusts me too much. He'll sign anything if I say it's safe." Samuel muted the audio and leaned back, his lips curling in a grim smile. He already knew Clara's weakness, greed. He also knew Ryan's, pride. And pride made men reckless. The next day, Samuel placed glossy documents on the dining table. "Clara, I've been thinking. Maybe Ryan's right. We should diversify." Her eyes lit up, hunger disguised as excitement. "Finally, Sam. I'll set up a meeting. You won't regret it." He nodded slowly. "I'm sure I won't." That night, alone in the quiet, Samuel pulled out a folder he'd prepared. The deal Ryan was so eager for was a trap, a paper trail leading straight to fraud, one that would collapse under federal scrutiny. Every signature Clara gave, every encouragement she offered Ryan, would tighten the noose around their necks. As he slid the folder back into the drawer, Samuel whispered to the empty room, "You'll both choke on the money you crave." His phone buzzed again with a message from the unknown number. "Do it carefully. I'll be watching." Samuel stared at the words, a chill crawling down his spine. Someone else wanted revenge too. The Reynolds dinner party shimmered with wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over polished oak tables, and laughter echoed across the grand hall where the city's elite mingled. Clara thrived here, draped in emerald silk and diamonds Samuel had once saved 3 years to buy. She was radiant, her arm linked with his, her voice filled with charm as she introduced him to people who barely noticed him, their eyes fixed on her. Ryan arrived late, swaggering in with the confidence of a man who believed every room belonged to him. He clapped Samuel on the back, his smile dripping with false warmth. "Sam. Heard you're finally ready to join the big leagues. Clara's been working on you." Samuel smiled faintly. "Clara's persuasive." His tone was flat, but neither of them noticed. They were too busy reveling in their own arrogance. Clara leaned in, whispering against his ear, "See? I told you. Trust me, this deal will change everything." He remembered another whisper, years ago, on their honeymoon when she had curled against his chest and promised, "I'll never want more than what we have." That vow had dissolved faster than champagne bubbles. Throughout dinner, Samuel played the part of the compliant husband, nodding, listening, even laughing when Ryan bragged about properties he'd flipped and fortunes he'd made. But under the table, Samuel's phone buzzed again. The unknown number, "Be patient. They'll bury themselves." Samuel glanced at Ryan, who raised his glass and toasted, to fortune, friendship, and the future. Clara beamed, clinking her glass against Samuel's with eyes full of hunger. Samuel raised his too, his lips curling just enough to hide the storm inside. "To the future," he echoed, already knowing theirs was destined to burn. Later that week, in Ryan's sleek office, Clara leaned across the mahogany desk, sliding documents Samuel had given her. Her voice was soft, seductive. "He's in. He trusts me. He signed." Samuel watched it all unfold from his laptop, the hidden camera recording every second. Ryan smirked, signing his own name beside Clara's. Perfect. By the time he realizes, the money will be gone, and so will we. Samuel closed the laptop slowly, his reflection glaring back at him in the black screen. He thought of the boy at the orphanage, his son, his real legacy, sitting on that small bed clutching a toy truck. Clara had stolen that from him. Ryan had conspired in it. The weight of their betrayal pressed against his chest like chains. That night, Clara returned home glowing, wine on her breath, triumph in her voice. She slid into bed beside him and whispered, "Sam, we're going to be rich." Finally. Samuel turned his head, studying her face in the dark, memorizing the curve of her lips as she smiled in her sleep. He whispered so softly she couldn't hear, "No, Clara. You're going to be ruined." His phone buzzed one last time on the nightstand. "It's almost time. Don't falter now." Samuel lay awake until dawn, sharpening his silence into a blade. The ink on the fraudulent contracts dried quickly, but the consequences would not. Samuel sat alone in his study that night, the glow from his desk lamp painting sharp lines across his face. The folder in front of him was thick, every signature, every timestamp, every digital trail Clara and Ryan had created, all copied and backed up in secure drives. His years in logistics had taught him one thing: the smallest detail unraveled the largest operations. Tonight, that lesson would become Clara's undoing. Clara entered quietly, a glass of wine in her hand. She leaned against the doorframe, studying him. "You're working too hard again," she purred. "You don't have to worry. Ryan and Ryan and the team, they'll handle everything." Samuel looked up, his eyes unreadable. "You trust Ryan a lot." She laughed lightly, masking nerves. "Of course. He knows how to make money. Don't you want me to be happy, Sam?" The word happy landed heavy between them. Years ago, he had carried her happiness like a shield. He remembered nights in their cramped apartment when he skipped meals so she could eat, how he pawned his late mother's necklace to buy her engagement ring. He had thought those sacrifices were the foundation of their love. Now, in hindsight, he saw them as the foundation of her entitlement. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that sent a chill rather than comfort. "You'll get everything you deserve, Clara." Later that week, Ryan called a meeting in his office. Clara was there, radiant in her tailored suit, playing the role of the ambitious partner. Samuel sat opposite them, quiet, letting Ryan dominate the conversation. "Sam," Ryan said confidently, spreading the documents across the table, "once this deal closes, we're looking at 7 figures in profits. This is the kind of leap that sets you apart from the average man." Samuel tilted his head slightly. "Average?" Ryan chuckled, oblivious to the venom behind Samuel's calm. "You're a smart guy, but you've played it safe too long. Clara deserves more than middle-class comfort. I'm just helping her get there." Clara smirked at the comment, not even flinching. Samuel's silence was deliberate. Each word Ryan spilled was another rope around his own neck. When Samuel finally signed the last page, he slid the pen back across the table. "If you say so." That night, back home, Clara wrapped her arms around him, her perfume intoxicating, her whisper full of triumph. "See? I told you. We're finally in the big leagues. Ryan says in a few weeks, we'll have enough to start fresh." Samuel kissed her cheek softly, but his eyes stayed open in the dark. "Fresh," he thought bitterly. "She meant without me." As the house fell silent, Samuel opened his laptop and uploaded the final set of files to an anonymous email. The recipient, a federal fraud investigator whose name had been passed quietly to him by the same unknown number that had guided him before. A new message pinged almost instantly. "Good. The walls are closing in. Don't stop now." Samuel stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. Clara had sold his child for money. Ryan had mocked him to his face. Now both were trapped in a cage they had built themselves. Soon, he would lock the door. The walls began to close faster than Clara could see. One morning over breakfast, she scrolled through her phone, her painted nails tapping impatiently. "Ryan says the investors want updates. We should wire the funds by next week." Her tone carried that familiar edge of entitlement, the same one Samuel had first noticed years ago when she had thrown a tantrum over a scratched second-hand car. Back then, he had laughed and promised her better days. Now he saw it as the earliest crack in a foundation that was never meant to hold. Samuel folded the newspaper slowly, his voice calm. "Are you sure you trust Ryan with everything? Deals like this can collapse overnight." Clara scoffed, not even looking up. "That's why Ryan handles it. He knows what he's doing. You should learn from him instead of questioning him." The words sliced deeper than she realized. Samuel had learned from Ryan. Every lie, every greedy smile, every moment of careless arrogance had taught him how to destroy them both. Later that evening, Samuel drove past the orphanage again. He didn't go inside, just parked across the street and watched the children playing under the dim yard lights. His eyes locked on the boy who looked so much like him. He remembered being 8 years old, standing alone in the cold after another foster family returned him like unwanted goods. His foster father's words echoed again, "When people sell your blood for gold, make sure you collect the interest when you take it back." He clenched the steering wheel, promising the ghost of his younger self that this time, justice would not slip away. The next day, Ryan hosted a private meeting with potential investors. Samuel sat quietly in the corner, letting Ryan boast about numbers that didn't exist. Clara chimed in eagerly, her voice syrupy sweet as she backed every word Ryan said. She even touched Ryan's arm in front of the investors, a slip so bold it made one man raise an eyebrow. Samuel caught the look and offered a thin smile, as if to say he was oblivious. He wasn't. He was documenting everything. When the meeting ended, Ryan pulled Samuel aside. "Sam, you've got to stop being so quiet. Investors want confidence, not hesitation." Samuel met his gaze steadily. "Confidence can be dangerous if it isn't backed by truth." Ryan laughed, slapping his back. "Relax. Once the money hits, we're all untouchable." That night, Clara cornered Samuel in their bedroom, her voice sharper than glass. "You embarrassed Ryan today. Do you have any idea how important he is? Samuel turned toward her slowly, his expression unreadable. You've staked everything on Ryan, haven't you? Her eyes flickered, the briefest shadow of guilt, then she snapped, yes. Because he's not afraid to dream bigger than you. Samuel nodded, his silence terrifying in its restraint. Good, he murmured. Then when he falls, you'll be buried beside him. Clara blinked, unsettled, as if for the first time sensing something beneath his calm. But she shook it off, dismissing him like she always had. She didn't notice the folder of recordings Samuel had already prepared for the authorities, or the anonymous tips that had already been sent. And as the house went dark, Samuel whispered to himself, tomorrow, the news tightens. The morning paper carried headlines that made Clara's hand tremble as she held her coffee. Real estate mogul under investigation for fraudulent investments. Ryan's name wasn't printed yet, but the description was clear enough. Federal investigators had begun circling the scheme he thought untouchable. She folded the paper quickly, shoving it aside as Samuel entered the kitchen. He noticed, of course. He always noticed. You're up early, he said, pouring himself black coffee. Clara forced a smile. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Ryan's deal? Samuel asked casually, sitting across from her. She stiffened, then recovered. You worry too much. He has everything under control. The lie slid from her tongue too easily, but the shadow in her eyes betrayed her. Samuel leaned back, sipping slowly, remembering how she once used to wake before dawn to pack his lunch when he was struggling at the warehouse years ago. Back then, her love had seemed pure, almost innocent. Now he could see the greed that had always been there, waiting for the right soil to bloom. Later that afternoon, Ryan stormed into Samuel's office, his usual arrogance replaced with a flicker of panic. Sam, we need to move quick. Some of the investors are spooked. We should transfer the funds offshore before anyone freezes accounts. Samuel studied him with calm detachment. Is that legal? Ryan smirked, though his eyes betrayed desperation. It's survival. Don't tell me you're too naive to understand the game. Samuel leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. No, Ryan. I understand the game better than you think. Ryan left without realizing the trap was already closed. Samuel had forwarded every incriminating file, every signature Clara had placed, every reckless word Ryan had uttered, to the authorities. He didn't need to chase them anymore. The law would do the work. That night, Clara sat at her vanity, brushing her hair with slow strokes, her reflection cold and proud. When this is over, we'll be free, Sam. No more small life. No more waiting. Samuel walked up behind her, meeting her gaze in the mirror. And what happens if it all falls apart? She laughed softly, shaking her head. You worry too much. Ryan always wins. He studied her in silence, then reached out and set the folded newspaper down in front of her. Does he? Her hand froze on the brush, eyes darting to the headline she had tried to bury that morning. For the first time, he saw fear flicker across her perfect mask. Samuel kissed the top of her head, his lips brushing her hair like a blessing, though his voice was cold steel. Don't worry, Clara. You'll get exactly what you asked for. In the quiet of the night, his phone buzzed again. Tomorrow, everything breaks. He looked at the message, then at the woman in the mirror who had once promised to give him forever. His jaw clenched as he whispered under his breath, and when it breaks, I'll be the one holding the hammer. It began with a knock at the door just after dawn. Clara stirred in bed, annoyed, her silk robe slipping as she shuffled down the stairs. When she opened the door, 2 federal agents stood on the porch, their badges gleaming in the morning light. Behind them, unmarked cars lined the street. Clara Blake, one asked firmly. Her voice cracked. Why yes. We have a warrant. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding fraudulent investments linked to Ryan Carter. The color drained from her face. There must be some mistake. My husband, she turned, expecting Samuel to appear and defend her. But Samuel stood calmly in the hallway, dressed neatly for work, his coffee mug in hand. His expression was unreadable, but his silence told her everything. "Sam," she cried, her voice desperate. "Tell them this is a mistake. Tell them." Samuel took a slow sip, then set the mug down. "Mistakes get corrected, Clara. This doesn't look like one." As they led her away, Ryan's voice exploded across the phone in her trembling hand. "Clara. They raided my office. Someone tipped them off, everything's collapsing." His voice cracked with panic, so unlike the confident predator she had once adored. Samuel watched her stumble, remembering nights long ago when she used to kneel beside their bed and pray with him for strength. Now she begged men in suits for mercy. He felt no pity. By noon, headlines screamed Ryan's downfall. Carter under federal probe, millions missing. Photos showed him being escorted in handcuffs, his trademark smirk replaced by a grimace. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions about shell companies and stolen funds. Samuel watched from his office, his face illuminated by the glow of the news broadcast. His co-workers whispered, shocked, but he sat in silence, remembering the sound of Clara's voice confessing in the dark, "The baby didn't die. I sold it for money." That memory burned hotter than any headline. Hours later, Clara sat in a cold interrogation room, her hands trembling as investigators played clips of her voice, recording Samuel had delivered. She tried to deny it, her words stumbling, but the evidence stacked against her like bricks forming a tomb. When Samuel finally walked into the room, summoned as her husband, Clara's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Sam. Thank God. You'll explain. You'll fix this, won't you?" He sat across from her, his hands folded. "I did fix it, Clara." She blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his voice low, sharp as a blade. "I found our son." Her face went pale. That's impossible." Samuel's eyes burned with cold fire. "No, Clara. What's impossible is forgiving you. You sold him for money. And now, that money is the rope around your neck." Her lips parted, no sound escaping, only horror. Samuel stood slowly, his shadow stretching across the table as he whispered his final promise. "Enjoy the hell you built. I'll be too busy raising the boy you threw away." And as he walked out, leaving her to the ruin she had chosen, Clara realized the most brutal part of Samuel's revenge was not that she had lost everything, wealth, freedom, even Ryan, it was that she would never again touch the child she once sold like merchandise. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Clara was led in, wrists bound, her once glamorous face pale under fluorescent lights. Reporters crowded the benches, cameras flashing like gunfire. Across the aisle, Ryan sat hunched, his smirk gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man watching his empire collapse. Samuel entered last, dressed in a simple dark suit, his calm presence commanding more attention than their chaos. Clara's eyes locked onto him immediately. "Sam," she whispered hoarsely, as if the name could save her. "Please, tell them. You know me. You know I would never." He cut her off with a steady gaze. "I know exactly who you are, Clara. I've always known. I just didn't want to believe it." The prosecutor's voice rang out, playing the damning recording Samuel had delivered. Clara's voice filled the courtroom, "The baby didn't die. I sold it for money." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Ryan's head dropped into his hands, the final nail driven into his coffin. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, hearing that line again, but this time it didn't shatter him, it fueled him. He remembered the night he held their newborn for the first time, tiny fingers gripping his thumb, a moment of fragile hope he thought had died forever. That memory had been stolen by Clara's greed. Now, reclaiming it was his vengeance. When the judge banged the gavel, denying bail, Clara's composure finally broke. She screamed, lunging toward Samuel, her voice ragged. "You can't take everything from me. You'll regret this." Samuel didn't flinch. He simply leaned closer as guards restrained her. "No, Clara. The regret is yours. You lost the one thing money can't buy back, our son." That night, away from the noise of flashing cameras and cold steel bars, Samuel returned to the orphanage. The boy ran to him cautiously, clutching the same battered toy truck. Samuel knelt, arms open, tears burning his eyes. "It's me again," he whispered. "And this time, I'm not leaving without you." The child studied him for a long moment, then slowly reached out. Samuel pulled him close, breathing in the warmth of his son for the first time since the hospital. In that embrace, years of betrayal, grief, and silence cracked open and healed with one promise. Clara sat in her cell that same night, replaying Samuel's words in her mind until they hollowed her out. Ryan sat a few blocks away in another cell, shouting about unfair trials, but no one listened. Their names were ruined, their freedom gone, their empire reduced to ashes. Samuel carried his son out of the orphanage hand in hand, the cool night air washing over them. For the first time in years, he smiled, whispering into the boy's ear, "You'll never be sold again. You're mine. Forever." Behind him, the lights of the city glowed like embers of a fire he had stoked carefully, patiently, until it consumed everything that tried to take what was his. Clara's wealth, Ryan's pride, their schemes, gone. The only thing left was his son, the piece of himself no betrayal could erase. And that was his ultimate revenge. The prison cell smelled of iron and sweat, a far cry from the perfume-soaked silk sheets Clara had once demanded. She sat on the narrow cot, knees drawn to her chest, staring at the cracked wall. The woman who used to command rooms with a smile now shrank in shadows. Every clang of metal doors sent shivers through her spine. Ryan's name echoed down the corridor one afternoon, prisoners laughing as guards dragged him past in chains. His once tailored suits were replaced by orange fabric, his hair unkempt, his bravado gone. Clara rushed to the bars, her voice frantic. "Ryan! Ryan, tell me it's not true. Tell me we'll get out of this." He turned, eyes hollow, lips curling into a bitter sneer. Don't you see, Clara? This is all your fault. If you hadn't pushed so hard, if you hadn't dragged Samuel into it." Her chest tightened. "No. You promised." "I promised you nothing," Ryan spat. "You were just a pretty distraction. I'll cut my deal. You'll rot here." The words shattered her more brutally than the iron bars around her. She collapsed against the cot, trembling, remembering nights when Ryan whispered sweet nothings while Samuel slept in the next room. She had believed Ryan was her way to freedom, to a bigger life. Instead, he left her caged and abandoned. That night, Clara dreamed of the child she had sold, the baby's cries haunting her like chains rattling in the dark. She saw Samuel holding the boy's hand, their silhouettes framed in the glow of freedom while she clawed at invisible walls. She woke gasping, her nails bleeding where she had dug into her palms. Across the city, Samuel tucked his son into bed, the boy's sleepy voice whispering, "Will you be here in the morning?" Samuel kissed his forehead, whispering, "Always." For him, that simple word was heavier than diamonds, a vow carved out of all the years he had been robbed. As Clara lay in her cot, the guard approached with a slip of paper. "Letter for you." Her hands shook as she unfolded it. The message was brief: "You thought you sold your secret. But I've always known. You're not falling because of Ryan, or the feds. You're falling because I made sure Samuel knew everything." The signature was a name she hadn't thought of in years, her estranged sister, Evelyn. Memories slammed into her, Evelyn storming out years ago after accusing Clara of greed, of chasing men and money at the expense of family. Clara had laughed then, mocking her sister's small life. Now Evelyn's name was her torment. No, Clara whispered, the letter slipping from her fingers. It can't be. But deep down, she knew. Samuel hadn't uncovered the truth alone. Someone else had sharpened the knife and placed it in his hands. And it was family. The one bond Clara had always despised, that had sealed her fate. The visiting room smelled faintly of bleach and stale coffee, the kind of place that stripped even the proudest soul of dignity. Clara sat at the table in her orange jumpsuit, her fingers tapping nervously against the scratched metal surface. She told herself she would see Samuel, that maybe he'd softened, maybe he'd changed his mind. But when the door opened, it wasn't Samuel. It was Evelyn. Her younger sister walked in slowly, composed, her plain dress and modest purse a striking contrast to the silk and diamonds Clara had once flaunted. Evelyn sat opposite her, folding her hands neatly, her expression unreadable. Clara's throat tightened. "You," she spat. "It was you." Evelyn tilted her head. "It had to be someone, Clara. You were never going to stop unless someone put an end to it." The words cut sharper than steel. Clara's mind raced back to childhood. Two girls sharing a bedroom in a small house, whispering dreams beneath the blanket. Evelyn had wanted simplicity, love, family. Clara had wanted more, always more, better clothes, better men, better life. When their father died, Evelyn had clung to their mother, while Clara ran toward money like a moth to flame. Their paths had split then, and now here they were, Clara in chains, Evelyn holding the knife that severed her last escape. "You betrayed me," Clara hissed, leaning forward. "No," Evelyn said quietly. "You betrayed yourself. You sold your child, Clara. You destroyed Samuel. You destroyed everything you touched. All I did was give him the truth." Clara's chest heaved, memories crashing down on her, the night she told Ryan the baby hadn't died, the flash of greed in his eyes as he kissed her, the moment she believed she had secured her future. She thought she had buried that secret forever, but Evelyn had dug it up, handed it back like a loaded weapon. Her voice cracked. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined me." Evelyn's eyes softened, but only slightly. "No, Clara. I saved your son. That boy deserves better than to be another casualty of your hunger. And Samuel deserves to heal." The guard called out, signaling the end of visitation. Evelyn stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "This is the bed you made. Now you have to lie in it." Clara reached for her, desperation spilling over. "Evelyn, please, don't leave me here alone." But Evelyn walked away without turning back. Moments later, another figure appeared at the glass window separating the visitation hall from the corridor. Samuel stood there, his son's small hand in his. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she rushed to the glass. "Sam! Please! Please, just once, talk to me." He didn't move closer. He only looked at her, then down at the boy clutching his hand. The child tilted his head, confused, but Samuel whispered something to him, and together they turned and walked away. Clara's sobs echoed through the room, raw and broken, as she pressed her palms against the glass. For the first time in her life, she realized she wasn't mourning the money, or the prison bars, or even Ryan's betrayal. She was mourning the one thing she would never again hold, the child she had thrown away. And that was Samuel's most brutal revenge. The small house on the edge of town was nothing like the mansion Samuel had once dreamed of with Clara, but it breathed with warmth. The laughter of a child echoed through the yard as Samuel's son, now no longer a faceless memory but flesh and blood, chased a ball across the grass. Samuel leaned on the porch railing, coffee steaming in his mug, his eyes following every move, every smile. Evelyn sat nearby, sewing quietly, the soft rhythm of the needle a reminder of the steadiness she had carried since childhood. "Dad, watch this," the boy shouted, kicking the ball higher than ever before. Samuel clapped, pride swelling in his chest. That's my boy. The word still felt new on his tongue, fragile yet powerful. He thought of the nights he had sat alone, staring at Clara's empty side of the bed, convinced that part of him had died with the child she claimed was gone. Now, that missing piece was alive, running in front of him. Evelyn looked up, her voice gentle. He has your determination. Samuel's gaze softened. And your steadiness. He wouldn't be here if not for you. She smiled faintly but said nothing. Their childhood flashed through his mind, Evelyn always cleaning up the pieces of Clara's schemes, warning her sister that greed had a price. Clara had laughed then, dismissing her as small-minded. But it was Evelyn's patience that outlasted everything. Across town, in the gray belly of the prison, Clara stared blankly at the wall of her cell. Her once sharp features had dulled, her eyes sunken. Whispers of her name carried through the corridors, not with respect, but with mockery. She had become a story inmates told each other at night, the woman who sold her child, who traded her soul for a man who abandoned her. During visitation, no one came. Ryan had cut his deal, his sentence reduced in exchange for testimony. He was gone from her life, leaving her letters unanswered, her name erased from his. Clara would sit by the window, gripping the metal bars, remembering the shimmer of her old life, dresses, jewels, whispered promises, and feeling them crumble in her hands like ash. One night, she dreamed again of her son, except this time he stood across a glass wall, holding Samuel's hand. "Mama," he whispered, his face pale, distant. But when she reached out, he turned away, his figure fading into the light. Clara woke screaming, her chest heaving, tears carving lines down her cheeks. She pressed her face into the thin prison pillow, choking on the weight of what she had thrown away. Meanwhile, Samuel carried his son inside, tucking him into bed. The boy clutched the battered toy truck as he drifted to sleep, the same toy Samuel had once seen in the orphanage. Samuel brushed his hair back, whispering, "You'll never wonder where you belong again. Not while I breathe." As he closed the door softly, Evelyn stood in the hallway, her eyes meeting his. For the first time in years, Samuel felt the ache in his chest ease. He had lost everything once, but now, with his son safe and Evelyn by his side, he had built something Clara could never destroy. And in that quiet house, filled with laughter and love, Samuel's revenge found its sharpest edge, not in Clara's chains, not in Ryan's ruin, but in the life they would never touch again.